So is Islam true? But what do we mean by truth? Because for me, generally speaking, truth is that which conforms with reality. If the debate is Islam true, does that just mean the Quran? Does that mean various tenets within Islam? I don't know. I'm open to any of it. I would assume that if the Quran were true, that would probably suffice. The seat of this chair is 18 inches off the ground. We could measure it. We don't need to book a theater and get an audience and have a debate about the relative height from, or the absolute height from the floor to the base of this chair. We can just measure it. You can't show up also with your own non-standard measure. You don't get to show up with your own ruler and say, oh, this one says it's 18 inches or this one says it's 43 inches. We have to have some standard that we're agreeing on when we're talking about determining whether or not something is true, whether or not we have a good reason to believe it's true, whether or not we're in agreement. There's an important notion within scientific concepts which branches outside of that as well, which is if you say the hypothesis is there are only white swans, that would be disproved, falsified by finding a single black swan. And that's all it takes. Are there truths in Islam? Absolutely. It would be a miracle if there weren't. That there's any book that contains factual information or even speculation about who we are as human beings that would manage to get absolutely everything wrong. That would be more miraculous than anything I've seen. But what portion of Islam is true? What percentage of it is true? If I have a list of 10 facts and 8 of them are clearly true and 2 of them aren't, is the list true? Would it be fair for me to say that this is a true list? It would be more accurate for me to say this. If you have a list of things that are the tenets of this particular view or the package deal of this view, what if the 8 that are correct are fundamentally trivial and are true in pretty much any worldview? Love is good. Kindness is good. That's not anything that is necessarily tied to one specific ideology. Even if you were convinced they were true, they do not testify to the truth of the ideology that includes them beyond that one single point. For example, humans exist. There must be some explanation for that fact. Some people propose that a God exists as an explanation for humans existing. And some people go to a specific God. Isn't that the one that's pretty much the whole ball game? Isn't that the one that matters? I would argue that you can't realistically claim that the package is true unless the uniquely distinct facts from that package are demonstrated to be true. The other factors are either trivially true or tangentially true. All organisms were created in pairs. My understanding is that's what the Quran says. That is false. It's absolutely false. There are parthenogenic species. I'm in the process of possibly buying some agama, some Lelapis ingavantre, which I've mispronounced horribly. So I should have just gone with whiptail lizard, which is another lizard that is parthenogenic. But if we only ever needed to show that one statement from the Quran was false in order to falsify the Quran in total, that's it. We're done. I'm not doing that. It's silly. It doesn't get us to where we need to be in this debate. But if anybody ever tells you there are no errors and no mistakes in the Quran, just ask them why it says everything comes in pairs if there are parthenogenic species that don't, that are entirely female. What about direct instructions that are supposedly coming from Allah? I didn't know about this. I'm not going to pretend I know or understand it, but it is something that I read about, which is in Surah 4, 11, and 12, where it talks about dividing up your property to your children and family and things like that. And if you go through and you do the math, to the male, a portion equal to that of 2 females. If only daughters, 2 or more, their share is 2/3 of the inheritance. If only one, her share is half. It continues on, and in the first verse it ends with, and Allah is all-knowing and all-wise. And then in verse 12 it goes on like with extended family and other things like that, and concludes again with, this is ordained by Allah. Allah is all-knowing, most forbearing. But the shares don't add up to 100% in either of those. Now, okay, maybe it's a scribal error. Maybe it's not a big deal. But I think if you're the all-knowing, all-wise governor of the universe and you're passing on your wisdom on how to divide up your belongings, we could at least get the basic math right. But worse than that is, I find it strange to think that this is the one correct set of instructions for how to divide up your property, taking not into account, which of your sons worked for you and which one was more lazy or, any other circumstances around. If you need to know how to divide up your property, boom, it's all done right here. And it must be correct, because it says that it comes from the all-knowing, most forbearing, all-wise God. If we find a human body, and it's dead, and we want to figure out what the explanation is for that dead body, there's a package of beliefs that we can put together, a model, a hypothesis that leads to a potential theory. To explain, for example, that the butler did it with the candlestick at 9 p.m. Even if we confirm the weapon, that does not prove that our model's correct and that the butler did it. And if we find out, for example, that the murder took place at 10 instead of 9, that also does not completely destroy the model, because we can edit our model and say, hey, we're going to revise this because we have new information, and as long as we're consistent with that, we now have a new model. And we can explain the incorrect time. This is how we go about explaining things. We have something, we explore it, we come up with a hypothesis, we test it and confirm it, we try to falsify it. It has to overcome other proposed explanations. So what facts of Islam need to be demonstrated to be true? Well, I would say the existence of a God would need to be demonstrated to be true, that the God has the characteristics they cite and claim, that the specific desires and commands of that God are as they claim, that Muhammad was a prophet, not just claimed to be or asserted to be, but was a prophet, that this was someone who spoke on behalf of a God, that he was the final prophet, that the various tenets about prayer and submission and its moral pronouncements are true and accurate. Talking about what methodology can we use to verify claims to be true. Right now, the only methodology that I've seen is trust the book. And if you find part of the book trustworthy, you should trust the rest of the book. It starts with, disbelievers are not aware. That's literally poisoning the well. That is literally a fallacy to suggest, if you don't get this and if you don't believe it, it's because you are a disbeliever who's unaware. But to say, are the disbelievers not aware that heavens were ripped apart and made all from water? No, I'm a disbeliever. I'm not aware of that. And the way we become aware of that is for you to show up and explain it and demonstrate it, or for your followers to demonstrate it with something beyond this book says so. Because I can point to other books that say other things that are somewhat similar in their impressiveness and unimpressiveness.